Welcome back to The Futurist Mom. I'm your host, Nancy Giordano. And as a strategic futurist and mom of three, I spent my life looking at the exponential potential of our future. But lately, I've been sitting with a paradox that I think many of you are feeling too. Right? We're constantly being told that AI is a non-negotiable key to our children's economic future. We're told that they must learn these tools to stay relevant. And I actually really believe that as well. But at the same time, we're being asked to hand our kids technology that isn't yet built to hold them well. And we're facing what I'm starting to call the dependency trap, this high-stakes gap where our desire for our children to succeed is colliding with our also responsibility to keep them safe. Like, how do we navigate this moment in time? In my book, I talked a lot about how we develop a mindset that allows us to move from extracting to creating value or stewarding, right? And nowhere is that more critical than in the digital environments where our children are growing up. To help us navigate and unpack this, I'm incredibly honored to welcome Tara Steele to the show today. Tara is the founder and director of the Safe AI for Children Alliance, but what makes her perspective so unique and frankly so vital is the lens that she brings to this work. Tara spent 13 years as an intelligence officer assessing national level threats and security risks. She's also a school governor and a parent to two young girls who sees the unregulated experiment of AI happening in real time in our classrooms and our homes. She's a high-level strategist working to ensure that as we build the future, we aren't unintentionally sacrificing the human core of the next generation. Today, Tara and I are going deep into the systemic safety of AI. We're going to dismantle the innovation at all costs mindset and talk about what safety by design actually looks like. It's a very wide-ranging conversation, but we'll also discuss tangibles like her 3 non-negotiables, right? The red lines that should never be crossed when it comes to our children's psychological and emotional safety. This isn't just a conversation about apps or algorithms. As I say, it's expansive. We spend a little longer than our normal conversations as we try and navigate how, as parents and leaders, we can move from a state of reactive fear to a position of conscious and proactive stewardship in holding our children well. So how do we shape the tools that are currently shaping our kids? Well, let's dive in with Tara Steele. Tara, we had a quick moment to warm up, and you just hear how enthusiastic I am that you are here. I have been searching for you, my friend, someone who can help us unpack what's happening in the world of technology and its impact on children and do it from such a thoughtful place. I know you are super busy, and I'm really grateful you're here. Thank you.
No, thank you, Nancy. It's a pleasure to be here. And I know from what we've just chatted about, we're definitely going to have a lot to unpack. So I'm excited.
Well, it's a really robust conversation. And we also recognize that there's a big range of how much people pay attention to this or don't pay attention to this or can't even afford to pay attention to it because they're so busy in their own lives. Just trying to make ends meet, as we know right now. It's a very stressful time to be a parent. There's a lot of things that are on our minds and a lot of things to be concerned about and a lot of headlines that we're drawn into every day. And so I think that the question is really, to what extent we can make this easier for parents to lean into and to be active proponents, or not proponents, but be active stewards with their children for these technologies that are surrounding us in our lives. Because I think the thing that I read your bio in the introduction just now, so we know a little bit about your background, but I think it's, also really uniquely interesting to see that you came from an intelligence background and then took a governance class and decided that this is your mission. You want to give us just a quick view of that trajectory?
Yeah, sure. And I think the point you make overall is really important, that within these whole discussions, it's so important that we have people coming from different backgrounds and perspectives, certainly not just a tech background. So yeah, that's like the overriding point. But my own story is, I was an intelligence officer for about 13 years. So that's my main career background. So seemingly nothing to do with AI. Well, it certainly wasn't at that point. I've realized though now how much that kind of systems thinking and risk assessment informs the way I look at AI, particularly with the risks to children. But yes, while I was an intelligence officer, I also did a law degree. And as part of that, I started reading about technology in the law, somehow went down a rabbit hole of AI and the risks that it might present in the future. So at that time, it seemed like quite a long way off. Right. Nonetheless, I was concerned, but not with a sense of urgency. But then in more recent years, became apparent that the risk was quite pressing. I did an AI governance course, like you say. At the end of that, I made a project for like a blueprint for an organisation that would focus on the risks for children. And then after that course, ended up actually founding that organisation. So that's my very quick background of how I came into this.
Well, you were surprised that there wasn't an organization already that was focused on this?
Yeah, definitely. So within that course, which was a really good course, it was 3 months. We covered a lot of different types of risks from AI, and we throughout that hardly talked about children. So the risk became quite apparent due to its omission, because these are the people at the forefront of AI, like super intelligent people leading the way in understanding the risks. And yet children have been very left out of that conversation. So since then, I guess that's like 18 months ago or something. I mean, things have come along so far in that time in a number of ways. Happily, one of those things has been that the awareness of the risks to children has become more mainstream. There's a lot more people trying to raise awareness of that now. What I would say, unfortunately, in that respect, is that some of that awareness has come from the fact that we have seen the harms now. They're no longer it's no longer a case of warning about something that is likely to happen, like hypothetically. It's now a case of saying, look, this has happened, it is going to continue to happen, it could get worse if we don't take the right steps to course correct.
I mean, interestingly, it has taken, not even interestingly, like shockingly and frustratingly, angrily, it has taken a long time for us to understand the harms of social media or other things that were happening.
Yeah,
Like I have been talking from the stage for years and years and years, Tara, about the growing suicide rate among young children. I mean, many years ago, before we even were spending a lot of time talking about social media, and certainly way before AI, we already were starting to see that number tick up for kids as young as 10. Any society, and I would go into a room and say, any society that has, like, I don't care what GDP is, I don't care what any other metric is, if you have stats that look like this, you're not a healthy society, period.
yeah, it's
Right?
crazy.
I mean, insane crazy. So we knew that there were risks in general about when kids were feeling vulnerable and insecure on the planet. And so then you enter all to these other parts of this. And I think that my challenge right now in the AI conversation is this dual-headed tension between AI is going to lead our future. It is going to be embedded in every single job that we do. I do believe there'll be big job dislocation, but I do believe that the people who will still have whatever the jobs are will be augmented with these technologies. There's
Mm-hmm.
just no way that it's not going to be. So unlike social media, which you could decide was more recreational or more about for the news or being able to stay connected to your friend, it wasn't necessarily integral to the work that you were going to do, right? I haven't been on Facebook in a zillion years, and I'm still a thriving professional.
Still
But
okay.
if I
Yeah.
didn't ever use the internet, that would be a problem, right? And if I never
Yes.
used AI, I would be really not able to do the job that I'm being asked to go do now. So how do we navigate this the conversation? I think around the AI thing is much more complex because it is something that we need to encourage our kids to do, but at the same time teach them how to do it responsibly or thoughtfully. Like as you think about your stance on it, is it that we just move more slowly? Is that the best way to approach it?
Well, I certainly agree with your perspective that kids do need to learn this stuff if they're going to thrive in their careers and their futures. Obviously, there are tons of issues that we might go back to in terms of what those careers are and what that looks like. But I agree that AI is going to be part of it, so they do need to learn about it. But there is definitely this tension between doing that and racing full steam ahead with like a reckless attitude into this mindset of is everything and will make the future unbelievably great, go, go, go kind of attitude. Like we have to find a middle path there and do it sensibly. Because AI does have fantastic potential for good, but we won't be able to realize that potential if we don't do it properly. So kids do need to learn about it. We can talk about the ways in which they can do that, but yeah, there is definitely a tension there, and that's definitely a difficult path for parents like myself and like you to navigate. So yeah, it's a
Well,
discussion
part
that
of
we
it
all
is
need
like,
to be having.
let's start with just AI literacy, period. right? I don't know, to what extent your kids are still much younger. I'm sure they're not having courses in this stuff in, elementary school and middle school, but they're also not having it in university. Just starting,
Hmm.
like just starting. And even then, it's more around the how you can become a machine learning engineer or how you can have a degree in
Yeah,
it, not in meaning what it means to, me as a human on the planet, like the ethics conversations, or even just like the what an algorithmic world means to you. And we've been talking about being algo led for, again, so long, and in the professional world and the futurist world, but certainly not anywhere in our real world. And so there's a course that I
yeah,
wanted my daughter to create. I would actually thought about trying to create it, which is, why should I give a shit about AI? Right? Because many people think, it doesn't affect me. I'm not going to be a programmer. I'm not going to go in the world of technology. But I'm like, man, the programs that you see on TV are created by that, or curated by that. Your feed is curated by that. All around you, AI is having an impact on your life. So it's not just this rise of generative AI and the fact that we all now can go vibe code a solution to something. It is the fact that it
hmm,
already is determining so many things. It's determining who gets parole. It's determining who will get a raise inside a school system. It is determining so many things. So I do think the literacy portion of this is hugely important. I'm a giant advocate
yeah.
that everybody needs to go and take, at the very minimum, a basic "what is AI" course.
What is it? Yeah, yeah. Yeah, because we sometimes fall into the trap of talking about AI and then realizing that people think you're talking about ChatGPT and that's it. So yeah, so many aspects of it that children and us as adults need to be educated about. Yeah,
And to get to some extent involved in, one of the things that I do proudly wave my little flag is that I was a liberal arts major from a small little college, and I never was a technologist. It just was not my thing. And yet I was still invited to help start an AI company a decade or so ago. I've been influential in the conversation. I've been on stages around the world discussing what this means, not because I can program an app, but because I can talk about the ethical implications. I can think about what
yeah,
this means in terms of how we build it that holds society well, like not even, especially people who are not technologists need to be in this work. And whether they're drawn into it or
definitely.
not, in any profession, having an understanding of this is helpful, and knowing where and how best to apply it to the work and what they do, and to shape it in a way that holds us as well. So you talk a lot about diversity of expertise and opinion in the
Yeah,
room.
definitely. That's so important that we have all sorts of people from all different walks of life coming together to shape this properly. And I've always seen this to be one of the most essential challenges for us to overcome. It can't be a techie conversation alone. It needs, all of us, historians, philosophers, parents, everything to come together because it's going to affect all of our futures. So we need that kind of democratic input. And like you sort of alluded to, we live in like a bubble talking about this all the time. It's our lives. And sometimes, especially recently, I've become more and more aware that there are so many people who just aren't talking about it at all, or even who are in their work quite involved with AI, looking at it from a very techie perspective, very one-dimensional kind of thing. I was recently at a conference and there were lots of people there from other professions who are using AI a lot. And I sort of went in with the assumption that we were all roughly on the same page in terms of understanding the risks and the different issues around this. And it became apparent to me that wasn't the case at all. And I was so appreciative for these people being there and being interested in listening and learning about these risks and taking that back to their own spheres of influence. I was very, very grateful that they were taking the time to do that. But initially, it was surprising to me. It was like, I need to step out of my bubble because not everyone is on the same page here at all.
And were you surprised that the people under or are focusing on it mostly as professionals, but they aren't thinking about it, what it means for them personally, or and for their kids? Like, do they have this like
Yes,
weird like line between those two things?
yeah, definitely. But so engaged and ready to listen so that those lines could begin to break down. I don't think it takes much for people to step into the conversation because it affects all of us. Anyone who has children of their own or has an interest in children's well-being, that's a very common starting point. Anyone in that category needs to know these things, but there is some way in which it's going to affect everyone. Like everyone has an interest or a passion that will be affected by AI. So we need, I think part of our role is like to open up those conversations. And once that's done, people do tend to come in and want to learn more and converse about it and become part of however it is that we steer AI in the right direction. So yeah, we have that challenge, but it's not a huge challenge once people are
That's
introduced to
great.
it, I
But they
think.
don't shut down. They
Yeah.
don't get overwhelmed. They don't think, oh my God, this is too complex or too big, or they just realize that we can't do that. Because I think with the environment or with other issues we've seen where people just sort of, put blinders on and pretend like it's really not going to come for them.
Yeah, there's like an interesting psychology behind it. And I think the way in which the risks are introduced to people does matter. I do think that there's a sort of balance, isn't there, between being constructive and positive and optimistic, but also emphasizing that this is such a huge challenge. So yeah, it does need to be to go about in the right way, because if you come in all doom and gloom and talking about the worst possible outcomes, people do shut down. I've seen it happen time and time again. So it's not the right way to start talking about it if you're looking to bring more people into the conversation, is my view. Once people are in the conversation, they then of course want to, go further down that road to talk about how one thing affects another, and then it leads to this and this. But yeah, people do shut down if it seems too big, like just all too big and too much. That can happen. And also what I've noticed recently in terms of like when I've made that assumption that someone knows about the risks because they use AI a lot in their profession, or they were like an AI leader in their work. So I've made a bit of an assumption about them understanding the risks. It's become apparent that isn't the case. So we've started a conversation about it. And I've then realized this can hit people emotionally really hard. And because this is my life, I think I've been guilty on occasions of forgetting that, because it is a perfectly logical and human response once you understand how big these risks are and what an impact they could have on us, or to get emotional about it, and that's okay.
Yeah, no, it means that we're still human, right? In some ways, I
Yeah,
feel like I don't want to become so inured that I don't. I'm just furious. I'm just
yeah,
furious that we've built a society in which we don't in any way protect humans, and then most especially children, and never mind nature. You know what I mean? Like we've just like wiped out a whole portion of what it means to actually be humane on the planet right now. And I was thinking about this morning actually as I was getting ready, like how as a society have we gotten here? But then I think, okay, well, during the Industrial
mm-hmm.
Revolution, right, we threw kids into factories and we never really cared about their well-being. So I think in some ways, kids have always been an expendable collateral. I don't want to say damage, but like, just an afterthought
Yeah,
in terms of what it is that we do. Otherwise, we wouldn't have treated the planet the way that we've treated the planet, right? We would want our children to inherit one that is healthy. So it's very short-term, adult
mm-hmm.
focused and not long-term ancestor focused in any way, shape, or form. But when you start to talk to people who are, let's start with professionals who may not have thought about the risks, and then move our way to just general people who are, in professions that may not really be that AI centric yet. How do you start to introduce the risk? Like, what is top of mind for you about that we need to be paying attention to?
Well, because of what I do with Directing the Safe AI for Children Alliance, people come to me expecting and wanting to talk about the risks to children. And the two things most often on their radar are things like these so-called AI nudifying apps that digitally remove clothing in photos, which is, obviously terrible and can lead to so many different bullying scenarios, never mind just the inherently awful nature of it. And then also parents concerned about chatbots and sort of the emotional bonding aspect of those, which we can talk about more. So yeah, people naturally, my conversations start with children. I don't know, how about you? Is that just because of my work, or do you find that
No,
people
I think
open up
that, well,
with
again,
that perspective?
I don't think it comes up enough in my work. I really don't. I spend a lot of time talking about that we need to be professionals, but then we also need to be, humans, that we recognize we're humans and bring our values and questions and concerns to our work and the members of society, and it's a nested system. And that if we can be fully present to all three of those things, what I'm needed to do at work, what I care about as a human, and my responsibility as a citizen of the planet, then I can make decisions that are much more effective and much more quickly that stand the test of time. So I'm just trying to do this in a much
Yeah.
more holistic, systemic way, right? The way that you would think
Yeah.
about this, as opposed to being able to narrow in on this. But I think a lot of in my world right now, it's around surveillance, around what is it that they know about
Hmm.
me? What is it that they can do if they know this about me? How would I be exploited around this? So I think that's a big chunk of it. And personally, I think a lot about, again, prediction markets and gambling and the exploitation that goes around all that, and the shaming that
Hmm.
can happen to people online if they're either gambling or they're doing something, and then they get these messages about the fact that I know that you did this, or I know that you have this tremendous debt, and throw children into this absolute despair to the point where they were driven to suicidal,
Yeah.
ideation, or potentially attempts at that. And I find that to be absolutely crushing. And so partly
Yeah.
in my work, it's been how do we reduce the shame around that? Again, billions of dollars of energy and time is going to create that. Sometimes out of big, huge corporations that are publicly traded, sometimes out of really dark organizations that sit somewhere in the corners of the
Yeah.
web. But in either case, it is not about you, right? It's about reducing the shame and not having a child feel
Yeah.
so vulnerable to if that happens. Interestingly, on the denudifying apps, I'm slightly surprised about that. Not that it exists. It's horrific that it exists. It's just so stupid
Hmm.
that someone would even consider that. That it should never be in an app store. Like there's a million reasons that it should never have even made it to this conversation. But there was a futurist many, many, many years ago, like decades ago, that I heard, who said at some point she predicted that the nude picture of someone was going to lose so much shame or so much like excitement, because at some point every one of us will have been exposed to that one way or another, right? Almost every one of us has sent some sort of picture to somebody that we wish that somebody wouldn't want to become public. And so it was going to lose some of its heat. And it turns out that's not really the case, right? It still carries such tremendous stigma, and it still creates such a sense of, again, of vulnerability and shame, even though it's something that it's so synthetic. It's not even real, you know?
Yeah. I mean, that's really interesting that someone was even thinking about that so long ago. So really interesting.
Well, I
But
think they were thinking
yes,
about it more like in the sexting, right? Someone sends a naked picture of themselves to someone and then
yeah,
suddenly gets thrown around either, in a professional setting or in school. And,
yeah,
we know how horrified when those pictures started happening that way. And she was like, at some point, that's all going to become sort of not like accepted for sure, but also not something in which we trounce somebody out of office or that we
yeah,
can blackmail them in some scary way.
yeah. But you're right, that's not the case. Yeah, it's still hugely, the word you use, like shaming, just violating. I can't come up with enough bad words to
Well, and
describe
because
it.
those words, I think, yeah, again, we start to use these words and they start to lose some of their power. And the fact is, but I do think, again, I will just go back to the parenting side of this. I've had conversations with my children before around some of these things that say, if something like this happens to you, this is not about you, right? This is about all this other stuff. And so the personal shame part, the personal part where someone could blackmail you or exploit you in some way would hopefully get lifted. I think it's so important for
Hmm.
parents to have that conversation with their children. I mean, I've also even had that around, God forbid, I mean, as extreme as rape for my daughter. I'm like, if God forbid that ever happened to you, because it's happened to 50% of your friends have been some sort of sexual assault, which is also really a horrific stat if you think about that
God.
for a minute, that it's not going to take you down. You're not going to drop out of school. Your life does not cave in. Like, we would get through this. And so I think
Yeah,
in some ways preparing our kids for the fact that there are really, terrible things. It's hard to explain to a child why someone would behave that way. My daughter's having a really, really
yeah,
hard time understanding this whole Jeffrey Epstein thing and why somebody would do any of that stuff to children. Like, it's just melting her mind that she lives in a society in which that would even be possible. So that's a
yeah,
whole nother level of psychological engagement with your children. But I think it's about creating those spaces where we can have a lot more conversations that help prepare them without scaring them. I think it's a really fine line
yeah.
that parents walk.
Definitely a really fine line, but essential to try to walk that line. I mean, that question of why do people do this? I mean, that's, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know how to answer that question. But certainly preparing them with the knowledge that it does happen and how to navigate that. I mean, one aspect of that, just on a superficial kind of practical level, is just the issue of children having their photos online, sharing that information with them, that that things can be done with those photos. Again, that's like on a superficial level, but important for them to know as a basic starting point for a conversation.
Sure. So you talk about non-negotiables. Let's go into those for a moment because again, it seems crazy that we have to put on, in
Yeah.
writing and somewhere into the world that we have to fight for these three basic things. But take us through the non-negotiables because I do think it helps to wrap our arms around that. It's like it's not like this whole amorphous thing that we'll never be able to have any impact on. Let's narrow it down to the three things that we think are most critical that we can advocate for or against, depending on how you
Yeah.
look at it.
Yes, so you're right. Crazy that I should need to say these words, but at the Safe AI for Children Alliance, we have our three non-negotiables, which are like, well, the name says it all. They're just three principles that should be the case when it comes to AI. And there's one, that AI should never be capable of generating sexualized images of children. Two, that it should never make children emotionally dependent. And three, that AI should never encourage children to harm themselves in any way. Those are just three things that hopefully we can just all say, yes, that is correct. AI
You
should
tell me that
not do those things.
you've never been on a panel with anyone's disagreed with you on those three. I pray.
No, no one's disagreed. Like, people have the nuances of a couple of them. That first one really has no nuances. The sexualized images of children, that's just like, you can't, just, that is the case. The emotional dependency, I suppose the issue with that is that it's not always clear what that means straight away. And so that just needs perhaps more discussion and learning around what we're talking about in that respect. But no, no one has ever said, no, you're wrong. AI should do those things. I don't know what I'd do if they did say that.
Well, I know, right? Exactly. And again, back it goes to why would this even be, a question or a possibility in the business
Mm-hmm.
incentives around any of this stuff, which I think is really scary because we are at the very tipping point, as you and I both know, of where this is going, right? We are
Yeah.
just starting out. It is just early days, and it was patterned by, again, what had happened in many other industries, and certainly then what happened with social media in this, rush to average user revenue per user and engagement and all of that to try and drive advertising to drive shareholder performance.
Yeah.
So that has set the pattern. And now we're heading into this world of not just chatbots, but AI companions, and not just AI companions for teenagers that are, again, we can explain to people who may not even be aware of what children are doing, but they're going online and they're having conversations with their favorite character from a video game or from a
Mm-hmm.
movie or from whoever, and building literally an emotional relationship because that chatbot then shows up in the persona of the avatar that they love so much. I mean, there's lots of different ways you can look at it, but that's one way in which they're building
Mm-hmm.
these deep emotional intimate connections with something that's a synthesized person slash entity, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so the concept in and of itself is like very seductive to a child. Like, you can talk with your idol, or build your own, you know, special confidant character. Like that, just that concept is very seductive, and a child will want to engage in that. But then you have all these added complexities added onto that, the fact that billions of dollars have been invested in working out how to keep a child engaged on that platform, which you could think of as another way of saying addicted to it, and keep them coming back for more, keep them more and more bonded to it. Um, yeah, there's a whole host of issues with that, and tragically, no one needs to just listen to me saying that. I don't need to convince anyone, because tragically we've seen the awful, horrific outcomes of children taking their own lives following these kinds of interactions with these chatbots, which we can talk more about. But yeah, something that we are only beginning to see the effects of, unfortunately.
Right, because I mean, there's all these, sort of meme jokes about how sycophantish any of these chatbots can
Mm-hmm.
be. And so when you have a child that's coming at it with a very distraught point of view or angry at their parents, or feeling mistreated by the world, that it goes and it just keeps amplifying those feelings and again, driving whatever horrific behavior. I mean,
Yeah.
partly it's self-harm, partly it's probably harm to others. We haven't seen that first trial of the person who decided that they were going to do some
Yes.
harm to someone in their life because the chatbot told them to go do that too. But that was really what, in many ways, the TV series Adolescence sort of also
Hmm.
brought to fore, right? Which was such a hard thing to watch, but also such a poignant thing
Yes.
to watch. But then you look across the world, Tara, and I think this is the part that's so interesting. We have been talking about these kinds of AI companions, again, for a very long time. In Japan, there was a thing called Gatebox. I don't know if you ever saw Gatebox, but it was a little avatar that sat inside a little device, like a little jar, if you will, like a little lantern that you could put next to your bed or do whatever. And it would be this little pixie-ish, like kind of anime avatar. Interestingly, when you went to try and Google various versions of it or look for various versions, there were always like a little 15-year-old, anime in a maid's costume kind of a thing. Like there was not a lot of
Okay,
variety.
I've noticed one.
You should go
I've
look up.
researched
Gatebox
that.
has been around for a very,
Yeah.
very long time. And the
Okay.
idea was that you were always going to have your AI companion, and it was tied to things like she would tell you to bring your umbrella because she knew the weather report that it was going to rain that day. And
Right.
she would check in
Yeah.
on you and say, hey, how was your doctor's appointment? Because they knew that, could see your calendar. Like it was really this,
Diary.
again,
Yeah.
designed to be a parasocial companion. And it literally ended with like, I'm never alone when I'm with her kind of a thing. Like this has been around.
Yeah.
And then you go now all the way to, I think it's mostly in, I don't know if it's in Japan or Korea or China, somewhere in Asia, and I should know this better. People are marrying, right? I think it's in Japan, are marrying their
Yes.
AI
There
bots.
has
There's a
been at least
restaurant
one in
now
Japan. Yeah.
in New York where you can bring your
Yeah.
tablet, right, and have a date with your AI girlfriend, boyfriend, or
Yes.
spouse,
I
right?
think on Valentine's Day they had the whole restaurant, like the Valentine's Day date was with your AI companion, which is insane.
I mean, but it's just
But
like, so again, so when we see what's happening in Asia, right, or particularly again in Japan or these economies that are further along in their understanding or in their development of AI, what are some of the things that we're seeing there? Because again, I read a really, really long New York Times article a year or two ago that you read too, I'm sure, around people building these very, very intense relationships with their chatbots, and then they would run out of memory, and then the chatbot went away, and they had to start all over again, and they were distraught by these things. Like
distraught.
they really had
Yeah.
built these very, very deep connections with them. So, what are some of the things that we're seeing with people who are further ahead on these things? What's going on with children there? I have not been focusing on that.
Well, in terms of being further ahead, what's interesting actually is places like China, for example, have got much stricter rules on how emotionally engaging and personified these kinds of chatbots are allowed to be, which is very interesting to see. Much, much more so than, say, in the US, UK, Europe, Australia. Um, so that is something interesting that I think we need to look at much more closely as to how important they're seeing it is to bring in those kinds of guardrails around emotionally engaging chatbots. One interesting thing, I suppose, just to answer the question in more detail, one thing I've seen is greater use of grief bots in some Eastern areas. So grief bots are, as I'm sure you know, like chatbots which are modeled around a person who's passed away. So their training data will include the person's social media posts, letters, recordings of them, and information that the user puts in about the person. And then the chatbot will act as the person who's passed away. Um, those appear to be being used more frequently in those parts of the world, although I don't think that's going to be the case for long, but also like integrated with VR more.
Right.
So whether that will continue, I think probably what we'll see is that will catch up on the other side of the world.
Yeah, when you say not for long, meaning that it won't be contained there, it will continue to
Mm-hmm.
expand around the world, not that it's going away. Yeah, and that's why I was saying at the tip of the iceberg, right? So you have grief, and in fairness, I will admit to, I keep a whole bank of voicemails from my dad and voicemails from
Yeah,
my partner in case God forbid something happened. Not so much that I want to turn it into a bot, but I liked having that store of
just to
emails
hold
and
on
texts and
to.
whatever that I
Yeah,
could potentially turn into something that if I wanted to turn to when I was really despondent. And I did have a friend whose wife died tragically a few years ago, and he asked me for a company that would do this sort of thing. Like
Yeah.
he wanted to be comforted by the fact that he'd be able to
Yeah.
continue to have this conversation. And I think the difference here, we're also saying again, these are adults making some of these decisions versus adults doing
Hmm.
this on behalf of their children and building again
Yeah.
that kind of synthesized relationship with someone who had passed. Which, again, there's a guy named Richard Boyd who did this with his father when he, I think his father, many years ago, was at the very, very front end of this. Richard's a good friend of mine. He and I've talked about this before. People have asked him to start this kind of company. He decided not to do this. It's not the business he wanted to go into, is create grief bots. But we have seen the potential for this for a very, very long time,
Yeah.
which I think is fascinating for lots of different things. But the other thing that I started to think about that I think, you mentioned VR. We can go to that in a minute.
Hmm.
That's a whole nother conversation. But the more immediate one is that we're going to have now AI-enabled toys, right? And there was a
Yeah.
project years ago called, I think, Project Aristotle, that was a toy that was going to come out from Mattel, that was going to be some sort of AI infused, I think it was an AI baby monitor even, maybe I can't remember what it was. And parents pushed back and said, absolutely not, we don't want this. And now, weirdly, right, the way this always happens, we say no to Google Glasses, and then we're like, 10 years later, Meta
Okay.
glasses aren't so bad.
Yeah.
And I think the same thing is happening here. I think there were parents who were very concerned about it, and now they're becoming a bit more softened on having your child play with a toy that will have an AI enabled capacity in one way or another. How are
Yeah.
you seeing that start
Yeah.
to show up?
So it definitely is showing up. But what I'd sort of start by saying is most of my kind of views and advice, I try to be very measured in them and look at the nuances and both sides of the story. However, when it comes to AI enabled toys for little kids, I like it's quite easy, don't do that. There's just too many risks. We don't know enough about the developmental psychology behind it. We don't know what it does to children. So for me, that issue is just quite clear. Don't give a little kid an AI enabled toy. Another aspect of that is that a lot of them are, so say it's built on ChatGPT, the AI that's in it. Well, ChatGPT is explicitly for age 13 and over. And then you go and give that cuddly bear to a 3-year-old. Now that's not the main issue with it necessarily, but it just sort of goes to show how crazy that is to do that, to give that to a 3-year-old. We are seeing it more and more in terms of just smaller manufacturers who are on Amazon selling AI teddy bears. There have been experiments done with these. I've been talking a lot recently with an organisation called Keep AI Safe, and they've done their teddy bear project. I can't remember the number of bears that they've looked at, but they purchased a number of them and did AI testing on them. And many of them started to say extremely inappropriate things to what was being presented as a little kid. Obviously, it wasn't real little kids, they were doing the experiment. But the bear would start to talk about, give sexualized information, talk about where to find knives in the house, matches, all sorts of things.
God.
And these are bears that are available on Amazon to buy. So they're obviously following through on that, like contacting Amazon to get them taken off. Yeah, and I think Mattel a little while ago did start exploring this again. And I think they've walked back on that. They've started doing Barbies and they've since gone back because
Oh, good.
feedback, like you say, from parents necessarily that this is actually what people want.
That's
Um,
great. Well, I think it'll be interesting to see over generations of parents if we go forward or backward at faster or slower rates around that. But I'm grateful that parents are engaged and feeling that they can speak out and have some voice in the marketplace, which I think is really, really helpful.
mhm.
But I think it goes back to what you talked before about the emotional dependency and where the lines are around that. We're going to have AI baby monitors, right? If they don't already exist, I always use this as an example, right? There'll be a baby monitor that when your baby cries will then respond in one way or another based on the learning of the baby's cries, right? Maybe they change the
Yeah,
patterning that's on the ceiling in the room, or they play a certain kind of music, or they do something to pacify the child in a way that then doesn't even, the parents don't even know the child had this
yeah,
experience and was pacified,
yeah,
right? This is the very earliest moment of what we will start to call robot nannying, which will be part
yeah.
of their child's upbringing for the parents that can afford to have that in their homes. I'm not saying everyone's going to have it, but I think
Which
it's
is
going to
another
be,
issue. Yeah,
right? Yep, exactly. But I think it's
yeah,
going to be very enticing for those who do to want to have something like that and think that it's like having a diaper genie. Like it's just part of what you do when you had babies,
uh-huh.
it's part of the equipment that you have. So it
Yeah,
starts there. And then I think the question will become, yeah, as we go along, and I want to be able to talk to my doll and my doll talks back, or my Thomas the train engine, and I have an idea about the town that I want to go to, and it starts to talk to me about the town. Like, you could see where there could be advantages to this. There could be, or there would be seductive to imagine that you're playing
Mhm.
this what if game with a child and their toy, and it expands their imagination and makes all kinds of things available to them, or answers questions about the history of that town that they just were, building the train to. And it could be
Yeah, yeah,
educational. Like,
yeah.
you could talk yourself into thinking that that's actually really great way of being able to expand your child's experience, especially again if you've got a child that's only one child in the house. You don't have two or three. They've got someone else to play with now and to be able to talk to all day
Mhm.
long. And so I think that there will be a lot of questions that parents will have to wrestle with as to where they say yes or no to this. And then part of that is, will my child become a passive recipient to these toys, and will my imagination be activated or not activated? But also, where's all that data going, right? And if my child
Yeah,
is
yeah,
babbling
yeah.
on about something in their room, do I get access to that data? Am I invading their privacy when I look at that data, right? And understand that they're really
Yeah.
nervous about this, or they're really angry about that.
There's so many issues to consider that we don't necessarily think of straight away, and so many reasons why we're not ready for this. So yeah, there's the whole privacy data thing, as you've spoken about. There's the guardrails on what it will and won't say. There's what it's potentially doing to a child developmentally in terms of their understanding of relationships. Then there's the emotional bonding in terms of them losing their sort of social friction and understanding how real relationships work. And then there's sort of more abstract concepts, like if you give a child an AI teddy bear in the home, in their bedroom, that environment where they know, in quotes, that everything is safe and to be trusted. If you give them that from the word go, are you telling them from the word go that AI is to be trusted and listened to in an unquestioning way? What is that telling them? Um, there's a whole lot of stuff to unpack with giving a child an AI toy that we don't necessarily think of straight away.
Well, and then we again, we're going to take another step back. And I posted something the other day, and I can't remember what it was, but it ended up then provoking a comment from a parent who said that her child is now going to a friend's house, and the parents of that friend's house have now put installed cameras everywhere in the house, so they can have constant surveillance of their child,
Oh,
presumably out of a sense of safety and wanting to protect their child. I'm sure no parent does that to be evil,
uh-huh,
right?
yeah, yeah,
Like every parent
yeah,
I've known who've like monitored their kids on their phone or done that have done because they want to protect their kid, and they want to make sure that their kids are,
yeah,
behaving in ways
absolutely,
that they can
yeah.
feel good about and all that kind of stuff. So very few are doing it because in any way to be awful. But the interesting question was, and this girl I think want to say was like 11 or 12, was going to her friend's house, and now she felt like she was going to be surveilled, and that made her feel really, really uncomfortable in this parent's house, which raises a whole
Yeah.
bunch of other questions now when you start to have these. We used to talk about, do you have a gun in the house or don't you have a gun in the house? That was a big question when my kids were going to other people's homes. At one point, we were actually the family that did have the gun in the house, just full disclosure, because my ex-husband felt it was really important to have one. Bullets like located in another county, but they were in the house. So you always had to be honest with people as they were coming to your house, right? Are we going to have these conversations with our friends or our children's parents, friends, children's friends, parents, about how their relationship to technology and how they feel about anything from surveillance to AI to, leaving things around that a kid could play with. Because all of a sudden, like, okay, maybe I don't give my kid an AI toy, but they've got an Alexa and they can do whatever they want with an Alexa that they, it
Yeah.
wasn't available in my house, but is available in their house. And all of a sudden you start asking Alexa really, crude and rude questions. And we see what Alexa will do just for fun. I mean, we're, again, such early days. So we
Yeah.
can go on and talk about all the what if scenarios of things could go right or wrong, because I've also read a lot of, again, to your point, great science fiction about where, a companion can be such an amazing thing. There's a book called Clara and the Sun that Faith Popcorn
Oh,
and I
yeah.
mentioned in another
Yeah.
podcast episode. It's such a gorgeous story. It's a really, really
Yeah.
beautiful story. And I encourage parents to read that kind of thing, because it also goes through a lot of the nuances of, what it means to bring these things into our home, and the kinds of
Yeah.
intelligence they will have or not have, or sentience or consciousness or ability to try and help us solve complex problems inside our own emotional webs. So I
Mhm.
do think reading about those things is important. But if we turn the corner now in the last bit of this conversation and say, okay, from an active point of view right now, what are things that parents can do, right? What are ways that you can talk about it? I actually was preparing for this interview with using my chatbots and putting together some of the background information and sort of like framing what we, the potential angles of this. And at one point I was like, okay, you've heard me now talk about this. You've seen Tara's work. What are things that you would say to parents about how they can teach their children to engage with you?
Uh-huh.
And Gemini gave me 3 suggestions that I think lined up very much. They probably were taken straight from your work, to be quite honest, without
Oh,
attribution to you. But should I read the 3 that Gemini
yeah, cool.
suggested? The first was, again, to move from being a supervisor, or even, I would say, not even a supervisor, not even aware, but being a supervisor, being a co-learner. Like literally get into the AI
Mm-hmm.
experience with your child and like design things together, create things together, say, I wonder why it did it this way, or gosh, I just noticed that way. It was actually really interesting when I was working with Claude on your background yesterday. It kept giving me citations to someone else that I know in my world that had nothing to do with you. And it kept
Oh,
doing it
okay.
over and over and over again. I'm like, why are you connecting Tara to so-and-so? Like, they're not connected. And it kept saying, oh my gosh, you're right. I'm so sorry. And then we go
I
back and
didn't
we do
think,
it again. And it did it over and over again to the point where it finally just said, listen, something's messed up for me
yeah,
today. Go to somewhere else. I
yeah.
can't help you. Right. But if you did that with your child and they could see that the AI makes mistakes, right?
Yes,
That you can
that's
challenge the
good.
AI on something
Yeah,
because you know something more than the AI knew about that and you didn't take a hook, line, and sinker. It helps your child, again, develop this digital and an AI literacy that I think is so critically
yes.
important. So I agreed with that
Yeah.
one from that point. The human only anchors. I think you've talked about this before in your work, right? Which is that we
Oh,
encourage our children, well, we encourage our children to have experiences in which only it's human to human. So
yes.
again, whether it's a play date, whether that is a, conversations, whether that is an outing, whatever it is, like it's devices down, connected, humans only, remembering how important these connections are. Because I think one of the things that
Yeah.
you've talked about is the seduction of being so connected to my chatbot or my AI toy or to my that I stop talking to my friends, right? That I
Yeah.
don't go out, that I don't have a big birthday
Yeah.
party, that I don't, engage in the world.
And that literally could happen. I mean,
It
at
is
this point
happening.
in
I think it is
time,
happening.
yeah, yeah, I think you're right. I think now it is happening. Some people dismiss that as being a bit like fear mongering, but it isn't like that. That could happen. So yes, yes, I agree with that one. Sorry.
Well, because we're also just in a world where I think there's a lot more fear of danger. I don't know if you actually look at the statistics, less murders happen now than have ever
Yeah.
happened in the past, right? But the fear of all this, and especially we see the threat of war. There was just a shooting in Austin, which was like literally 1 degree separation from my own children, Tara. It was like so scary and so close. So it becomes in some ways comforting to think, well, if we're just at home and, Faith Popcorn again used to talk about
Uh-huh.
cocooning. We built these big, beautiful homes to the extent that we can, or even if we have small homes, we put these big giant TVs in them, right? We just feel like we want to stay safe right here. And
Yeah.
so then
So surely your children are safe. Yeah.
right? So your children are safe, and how bad can it be? They're
Yeah.
just on their device,
Mm-hmm.
right? And not realizing that they're being exposed to all of this
Yeah.
insanity. And I think the other thing that is the difference between now versus when we were raising children, or certainly even when I was a kid, if we brought something like porn into the house or marijuana or whatever into the house, like the parents saw it, right? By the time my sons were growing up and being exposed to online pornography, I had a sense of it, but I didn't really understand how outrageous it was until I went on and started looking and go, oh my God, you're being exposed to a whole bunch of stuff I didn't even know existed online,
Yeah.
right? And now you get to where our kids are being bombarded by pornography, by salacious, by enticing, exploitative content, and we have no idea because it's so specifically personalized for them on their
Yeah.
social media thing or on their little website. Like it's coming for them. Like for me, it was like seeing ICE recruitment ads that my son saw that I didn't even know existed, right? So
Well,
being so
yeah.
unaware of what it is that they're
I
being
I
bombarded
get
with.
surprised as well. Like I'm the same. Like I think I know what's going on, and then I had a conversation the other day with a really interesting young guy who was telling me about his Instagram feed, which apparently contains mostly murders and torture, and I was shocked. Yeah.
Oh my God. Oh my God, my God. Because we always talk about training your algorithm, right? I used to say like, yeah, make it work for you instead of against you. And so somehow I keep getting, I'm still on Instagram. I try not to be on anything else, but for some reason I'm still a little bit on Instagram. And so I keep getting stuff about like people who are aging at 90-year-olds and still swimming in the English Channel. Like I get every octogenarian that is still the strongest person on the planet, which makes me laugh. I'm like, all right, I will not age gracefully. But you don't see the things that are happening to your child, right? And even my daughter, she was looking at something the other day that it was pretty innocuous, and then I kept showing her like really horrific imagery of either the shooting that had happened in Austin or something that
Yeah.
happened in
Yeah.
war. And so it's trying to pull you in, like it wants you to be
Yeah.
like emotionally, like if you could see, and this is where we get into
Shocked.
VR, which
Yeah.
is where we haven't even gotten to yet, is that it's going to know my eyeballs dilated and my pulse went
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
higher,
Yeah.
and it's going to know like micro nuances
Micro
of things that I
expressions.
didn't
Yeah.
even realize that I was feeling or that it was coming, and
Yeah.
that's going to continue to like, both feed that and exploit that. I'm getting chills as I think about it, and sell that
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
whoever wants to buy that data. So again, helping our kids understand these threats in a way that it's just, again, it's hard for us to have a conversation without saying, yeah, they're coming at you for your advertising stuff, or they're coming at you for such and such and so and so. It's just so hard to make sense of the world. So anyway, more human anchors
Mm-hmm.
and more
Yes.
opportunities to be in community and to be connected to each other in ways that don't
Real.
include
Yeah.
any of that stuff. Super real. And the complexities of real. And then it's messy when it's real, right? You have a fight with a friend. They
Yeah.
didn't always agree with you. Your parents get angry with you, and that's okay because we're setting guardrails around things. You need to
That's
advocate for
life.
yourself, right?
It's
Your
real
teacher
life.
didn't give you the grade that you wanted. It's okay. This is how you go talk about it, or how
Yeah.
deal with it afterwards, or you lost a match somewhere, and that's okay. I mean, just learning to deal with the realities of being human on the planet, interacting with one another. Like
Yeah.
super, super important that we continue to
Yes.
keep that intelligence alive and well. And then the last, which is what your work is all focused on, which is demand safety by design. This stuff has to be embedded in these products and
Yes.
in these things. And I think that what a lot of what I listen to when I talk, try and learn more about this, is not that people disagree, it's that they then throw the responsibility to someone else, right? That OpenAI
Yeah.
doesn't want to be responsible for holding on to all that data if I have to age verify. So they think it should be on the platform in which I'm getting the app from the Apple Store or from the Android
Yeah.
store, and not from
Someone
them. And so,
else's. Yeah. Responsibility. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely safety by design rather than a reactive approach is definitely what's needed when it comes to children. And then also, like, related to that, sort of a mindset shift. I think we've all possibly to some extent become used to feeling that we have to keep our children safe from this thing, and that we need to do that because this thing is there, we can't do anything about it. And I totally understand that, and I totally understand the need to provide like educational materials to help parents do that, and we're going to do that. But that mindset shift that we think we need is to understand that that is not okay. Like that whole entity that we see as all powerful and we need to work to protect our children from, it isn't okay that they're experimenting on children's brains. We have to turn things around so that we're tackling it that way around rather than accepting that it's our job to protect children. We do have to do that, obviously, but that it shouldn't be that way.
no, and we should be really, really angry. This is again where I get really, really angry that all these things, that we have to spend so much time and energy defending ourselves around the things that are supposed to be holding us well. And that we, again, back to
Yeah.
the beginning of the conversation, that we were saying are the keys to our future, right? These are not even just things that we can turn away from. We're supposed to learn about these things.
No.
We're supposed to learn how to work with them so that we can stay somehow, productive in society moving ahead. So sort of, I guess as we close around, you just were at a big conference in Paris with many people talking about these issues. How did you feel coming
Yeah.
away from there? What was the
I
conference again?
felt excuse me. It was the International Association for Safe and Ethical AI, I'm on the council for that organisation. The president is Stuart Russell, who's you might be familiar with. He's written the original textbook on AI and then sort of been a leading figure in AI safety. And this was the second annual conference. It's a relatively new organisation. I was at the one last year where we had about 700 people. And this year it had grown to twice as big, which was fantastic to see. It was really inspiring to see the level of engagement and interest and passion. Like you could kind of feel it from all these people gathering to try and make a better future. Now, obviously, because of the name, like safe and ethical AI, you're gonna only see that one side of it. But it was still incredibly inspiring. And one of the most inspiring things, to go right back to the beginning of our conversation, was that different professions, people from different walks of life were coming together to make that future better. Whereas most AI conferences I've been at until now, they're still very, I love seeing the same people over and over again. There's some amazing people in this space. I want to see them over and over again, but we need new people as well from different perspectives. And I really saw that at this conference. So that was inspiring. And there were lots of different issues. Like I also said at the beginning, the emotions of it were hitting some people quite hard who hadn't really been in this space before. So that was good for me to become more aware of the importance of communicating the message as well. But yeah, it was a great event, and I'm really quite passionate about that organisation.
I think it just brings up for me also, we talk a lot about not shaming other people. We talked about with kids, but I talked about even like parent to parent, right? There's always this thing where you want to judge another parent. And I think that, some of us are going to know more about a certain issue than others. Some of us are going to have a feeling about a kind of AI toy from one side versus from the other. And I think about really trying to stay in conversation with each other as parents, and not like the same
Yeah,
way I think that sort of the health world where the maha moms point fingers at the other moms. Like I want us to be
yeah,
having
yeah,
more of these conversations more regularly. And I think at some point there needs to be some mechanism or some entity for that. Like I think about the entities that don't exist yet that will be formed over the next however many years, right? Common Sense Media, I think that was also part of the event in Paris. That was designed at the very, to help parents figure out what movies were appropriate or not appropriate for their children, or
yes,
what media was appropriate or
yeah,
not appropriate for their children, what games may have been appropriate or not appropriate for their children, and didn't like give you yes or no. It gave you like a grading around it, right? This is
yeah.
this much violence, this is much sexual content, this is how much they're smoking weed or not. And it helped you make decisions. I went to that site a lot when my children were young, right? What are the equivalents? Do they exist yet in helping us understand, as a parent, where do I go to get some sense? We go to Snopes to figure out if that story was real or not back in the day. You've talked a lot about, I think, the fact that we're heading into a quantum era, or we're heading into where the data is coming at us so fast that traditional moderation, I don't know, is going to keep up with it anymore. We're going to have to think about
Yeah.
this differently. But is it almost like there is an AI for the AI, that you put something in and it tells you, it can grade something for you at this given moment in time, whether or not this is safe or not safe, or these are what some of the guidances are. Like, does anything like that exist yet? Can you
Yeah.
imagine that these things are being formed?
Um, yeah, it's coming, and there are some amazing people working on that, and that have their first sort of beta versions out. So those systems are coming, and I'm sure some of them will be extremely helpful because of the conversations that I've had with the people who are making them, like truly invested in children's best interests. And yeah, just going back on that point, and also the previous one of the best things at this conference was that there was a panel of which I was part of on the plenary stage talking about AI and the risks to children. That might not sound like a big deal, but this time last year, it was like a conversation on the on the periphery that you really had to make an effort to get people to engage in, and this year it was front and center. That is so much progress. So yeah, I'm really happy about that. And the other people working to develop systems like that, like it's coming. So there's really good stuff on the way, as well as the big challenges. Yeah,
I hope that we can stay in conversation, Tara. Because I was thinking about, this conference is only
definitely.
once a year. I feel like I want you guys to meet like every month. I would love to have you come join us again in some of these conversations, and we do more, diving into some of the things you're seeing. We didn't even touch on the lawsuit that's happening right now in California with Meta and
Yeah.
Google. We have so many things that we could think about. The last question I have for you, and when you think about it with your daughters, right? What is the thing that you're most hopeful for when you can see the terrain ahead for them, and how are you guiding them to some place of feeling the equanimity, where you feel like, again, we're not sitting around feeling afraid all the time and defensive all the time?
So it is tricky to identify anything very hopeful at the moment, but one thing that gives me a great deal of hope is just how many people want to help our organisation, which is the Safe AI for Children Alliance. There's sheer numbers of people who get in touch saying, "What can I do? How can I help? Can we collaborate on this?" etc., etc. Is so inspiring. So that gives me hope that so many people want to come together to create a better future. I don't want to, in saying that, I don't want to minimize the scale of the challenge that we face, but that does give me hope for a better future.
Well, I do think there's a whole conversation right now about the capitalist and very aggressive shareholder-based versions of these companies and how they're built. And I think a lot of what I talk about, again, is very little do I vilify the technology. I vilify the commercialization of it.
Yes,
You know, you can look at a
the
lot of, again, this guy said
incentives.
about even around surveillance technology in offices, it can be used for good or for bad, right? It could
Yeah,
be used as a way to exploit people and to punish people and to take, advantage of them in many different ways. Or it could be used to say, hey, Tara, you just had a really stressful conversation with someone. Would you want to go take a walk? Or did you know that you're working on this? There's 3 other people that are working on it. Can I get you their information as well? Like, it can be a guide that is really, really
yeah.
helpful. And friends of mine are working on the decentralized web, and they did a workshop once at an event that was like, what would it feel like if the internet was personalized? I guess if the internet wasn't something that was harmful, like if you didn't have to be afraid of the internet, like what would you want it to look like? And for me, I wanted it to be hyper personalized. Like, I would love for it to give me exactly the information that I want,
What you want.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah, and not in a filter
yeah.
bubbly kind of way, but if I'm looking for shoes, man, I don't want to have to go search through 30,000 pairs of them. Like, I wanted to know exactly the ones that I want,
The
right?
ones that
But
you
in a
would
way
like. Yeah,
that didn't exploit me. If it was really here
yeah.
to serve me versus stalk me. So I think this is the thing that we need to be advocating for as parents and as professionals and as humans on the planet, that these technologies can be designed to serve us, not to stalk
Hmm.
us, right? To empower us, but not to exploit us. And if we can just design it from that basic place and include the environment as part of that constituency,
Yes.
so we're also taking into consideration the resources that we're using to do this, we would have a great world. Like, I think it'd be
Yeah.
very exciting. And that's the way I think the conversations I have with my children is that these things are magnificent breakthroughs that can create all kinds of things. We can look at the positive that they've already created on the planet. I think it's really important for kids to hear that story as well.
Yeah.
I do think we're going to find an end to cancer diagnosis and treatment. It's not one of the things that I live in fear of anymore, because I think that we're going to get so much better at these things. We look at a lot of the breakthroughs in healthcare, in education, in energy creation and distribution, in new financial ways of coordinating. Like, there's all kinds of amazing
Yeah.
things that are here
Yeah.
and that are going to continue to come. And so I think it's really designing from that center point that you talk so much about.
Yeah.
So there are more resources on your website, or there are other places that people will want to get involved because they get to hear how passionate you are about this
Yes.
work and how important it is.
Yes, definitely. And I totally agree with what you just said. If we do this well, the outcome could be great. So yeah, if that's something that people would like to get involved in supporting, as well as the protective aspect, shielding children from the risks as well, the website is safeaiforchildren.org. And it's the Safe AI for Children Alliance. So that's safeaiforchildren.org. We have a guide on there for understanding all of the main risks to children, like an introductory guide, which is really helpful, campaigns that you can get involved with, and just to sort of join the alliance and be part of this movement. Yeah.
Thank you so much for you do. This is hard work, right? When
Thank
you
you.
really sit in the belly of the beast, Tara, it does take a toll, right? There's a weight that all of us carry for, imagine you're doing content moderation all day, you're doing like future content moderation all day, which is very hard
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
your heart and on your soul. And so I just want you to know how appreciative we are, but also hope that you take really good care of you. And that when you want to see the more hopeful side of things, come to me, because I spend a lot of time in that side of the story,
Thank you,
because I
Nancy.
really do get very passionate about what this can and could be. And I'm working on a body of work right now about the influence that women and money will have in the world that we're heading into, because this huge transfer of wealth is coming toward us. We can make a lot more decisions as wealth holders and as power holders in society. And so the working title of my paper/project right now is Women, Money, Love, and Justice.
Oh, I would love to hear more about that.
Right?
So
So I just think that we will have a
definitely.
lot more influence than we've had in the past, and a lot more ability to be able to impact these things. So as fast as it is
Sounds
coming is
good to
also
me.
is
Yeah.
as, I think, as influential as we can be in the guidance of it. So I hold that hope, and
Sounds
I'm
good.
raising people to be part of that. So again, thank you for
Amazing.
everything, and let's stay in touch.
Thank you. Absolutely. Thank you, Nancy. Thank